This program is a collaboration of personal opinions and individual free thought. It does not represent the views or narrative of the mainstream corporate media hacks. Viewer discretion is advised.
And here we go.
Live from the bell tower, taking a stand for your rights, your liberties, and all the bullshit in between. You're listening to Break the Bell Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and whatever else you're claiming to be these days, welcome to the live edition of the Break the Bell Podcast.
Hello, beautiful bell breakers. It is Tuesday night.
It is Tuesday. We are late. We're a day. We're just like, fuck, we forgot. No, we are a day late because we have a special guest on this week, and that is Jose Galison of the No Way Jose podcast. And we're going to be getting him on in a couple of minutes, and we're going to be talking about anti-government sentiment. You know, that fun, happy topic that we like to discuss.
Yes.
Make sure we get put on as many lists as possible.
Exactly, and that's what we call Tuesday.
Yes. How many lists do you think we're on so far?
Oh, gosh, at least a dozen.
Have we made it on Hillary Clinton's suicide list yet? That's the real
No,
question. Not yet.
that's when you know you got the big time. I mean, YouTube is like, okay, that's okay. You're like in the amateur league, but man, you get it on Hillary's list.
Yeah, that's how you know you've made it. Is when you
yep.
2 bullets to the back of the head.
Yep,
You have made
suicide.
It. Yes. Locked in a trunk with the keys thrown on the other side of a field. You know you made it in
That's where I
life.
want to go.
So we're going to be talking about specifically the anti-government sentiment of the 1990s because it interests me.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in the 90s. I was a little shitlin though, so
Sure.
I don't really remember all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had no like kind of realization that the shit was
Right.
going on back then.
Yeah.
Because I was like in a bubble, and I was very kind of living under a rock
Right.
too. So
It's when I started paying attention.
Yeah.
Is when this stuff was going on.
yeah, so you have firsthand knowledge, kind of like
Right.
memorable experience. I do remember like I remember hearing about Waco, like my
Mhm.
parents joking about it because that's what you do with
Yeah.
like mass murder of children and
Right.
U.S. citizens is you joke about it. I mean, that's what we do. So
Well, I always thought it was funny that you had Waco, you had the Oklahoma City, and then you had Columbine all happening like right there next to Hitler's birthday.
yeah,
It's like the same.
right, because
range.
his was what 4/20, right?
Yeah.
April 20th. Yeah, and I feel like there is some kind of like symbolism and dates
Yeah.
and numbers and stuff that I mean, my conspiracy brain thinks that
Oh, yeah,
it's
right.
intentional. So
Absolutely.
So we're going to be talking about a lot of this stuff from like Ruby Ridge to Waco to the Oklahoma City bombing to the militia movement of the 90s. I mean, it was just a kind of a weird time.
Yeah, it was kind of like the right like of the 60s.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Exactly. So a lot of weird stuff happening, a lot of like pushback, and then all of a sudden it was just like gone.
All right. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about all those things. Once we get Jose in here, he is in the waiting area, so we want to keep this intro nice and short. We got to mention our sponsors, obviously. That is Run Your Mouth Coffee. Let me find their logo. There it is. Run Your Mouth Coffee supports our right to be able to speak out against the government and be able to hate the government if we want to, you know? And I feel like the two of us kind of collectively have somewhat of a hatred towards the government.
Well, when you
is dangerous.
have your eyes
obviously.
open, it's only natural, I think.
Right. And that's the key, is having your eyes open. So Run Your Mouth Coffee supports our right to be able to say this stuff here without getting put on a Hillary Clinton hit list. Or if we want to, getting put on
the
Hillary
list.
Clinton hit list. Yes. Go to rymcoffee.com. They also, forgot to mention, they also make really good coffee.
They do.
They do. They support all these things, and they also make delicious coffee. Go to rymcoffee.com. tell them we sent you by using the promo code Break the Bell, and you'll get 10% off your purchase plus free shipping, and that's a good deal. Support small businesses that stand up for your rights and stand for the things that you stand for. Don't just go for convenient because it's convenient, even though those like big corporations like stand for everything you're against. Support small businesses that support you.
Absolutely.
Like Run Your Mouth Coffee.
Yes.
RYMcoffee.com.
Another quick shout out. You started a morning show.
I did. I was just about to get there.
Boom.
New morning show out. Me and my brother of the System Is Down podcast decided to collaborate together to win all of your hearts and souls. And we're doing a new show called the Two Scoops Morning News Show or something. It's called Two Scoops. Two Scoops.
Fill in the blanks.
It's going to be every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m. when we feel like it. Because it's not going to be this Thursday because I'm not going to be here. And it may not be on at 7 a.m. every day, every Tuesday and Thursday, but tentatively it's at 7 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. But we always have that. We reserve the right to say if we feel like it. So this morning we kicked that off. It was kind of a surprise. We were just like, hey guys, here we are. Go back and check that out. It's on both of our podcast platforms and both of our YouTube channels. We just a little kind of hint of what we talked about. We talked about Hillary Clinton's new line of hats, and also some black people do look alike. Those are the conversations of this morning. So it's a short form for all you people that are like, I cannot sit down and listen to a 2-hour show, 2.5-hour show. You guys need to shorten it up. We got something for you now. It is like 20 to 30 minutes max because that's all the time I'm willing to give that early in the morning. So you can sit down while you're enjoying your coffee in the morning.
Your Run Your Mouth coffee.
Your Run Your Mouth coffee, obviously, and listen to us talk about some more bizarre bullshit, I guess. It's like, we're like, we don't do this thing enough. We should do more of it.
We need to get them in the morning.
It's like we don't get enough downloads, enough viewers for one show, so we bumped it to 2 shows, which that's how you get more viewers, right?
Of
and
course.
Then we're like, you know what? We need more viewers, so we bumped it to spread it out to 3 shows.
It worked for CSI.
It did. Exactly. So now we are across the board. So we got a morning show, 2 Scoops. Check it out. First episode dropped this morning. Go give it a like, a follow, a subscribe. It's going to be alternating, but back and forth between our channel and his channel. So you can't just get comfortable on one channel. If you want to hear both of them each week, you got to jump back and forth.
And there's always a cliffhanger. So you got to
jump
over.
You got to jump over. So that's the 2 Scoop show. Make sure you check it out. Check us out all over social media. We're at Break the Bell Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I don't know where else.
On YouTube.
Yeah, we are back on
Tentatively.
YouTube. Yes, for a while. We got to get into this intro video because Jose is waiting for us, and I'm excited for this conversation because who doesn't like talking about hate of the government?
Right.
We will be right back in just a minute.
What did you say?
You talking to me?
What the heck are you talking about?
What did you say?
What did you say?
What did you say?
Are you talking to me?
Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?
What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
What are you saying?
What did you say?
Are you talking to me?
Well, maybe he was talking to me.
What did you say?
Talk to me.
What in heaven's name are you talking about?
Talk to me, baby.
What did you just say?
What did you say?
You listen to me. Are you talking to me?
Are you talking to me?
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Jose Galison, is that how you pronounce it?
I usually pronounce it Galison. It's a completely made-up name, so it doesn't matter. So.
Okay. Well, I just saw it on YouTube, so I just
Son of Galley.
There you go. Senor Jose. Totally made up name, I guess. So Is Jose totally made up too?
Jose is made up.
Okay.
Damn, I
Okay.
feel like we need pseudonyms now.
I feel like I've been kind of trying to process in my head how such a white guy has a name like Jose for like the entire week here, and now I feel like a total dumbass. So
I just tell people I'm Argentinian, and then let them connect the dots.
they're like, oh, that makes sense. They're like Nordic, Spaniard, South American, right?
Yeah, I think there's some Aryans there.
Obviously. Jose, how's it going?
Good. I'm glad you're having me here. I wanted to real quick touch on how a lot of black people look alike. I thought it was kind of funny because probably the reason you brought me here is I'm doing like an OKC series right now, and what drew me into the OK series was a story of Terrence Hickey, who was like the hero cop who like saved multiple people in OKC. And
yes.
It seems like he had some information, and then he died by suicide, in the most bizarre suicide ever. Something about the fact that he looks like very much like one of my best friends, and but I guarantee if I showed him, he'd just be like it's one of those ones where he's like a generic black dude face, and then my buddy kind of has a generic black dude face, so it's like they just kind of look alike in that way, just the same way just like Timothy McVeigh looks like every other white dude.
Right. Exactly. So, that is actually what re-sparked my interest in this whole 90s era, because I've been meaning to do a show where I dig into kind of the militia movement and the anti-government sentiment of the 90s. I've been meaning to do it for a couple of years now. I just haven't. And then I saw you had posted in a group kind of conversation amongst fellow podcasters that you put out this Oklahoma City bombing series, and you posted the first episode, and I was like, oh shit, I really got to listen to that. And then I kind of forgot about it until you posted the 5th episode, and I was like, all right,
I'm really getting into it now.
Yeah, a 5-part series. This has got to be good. And so I gave it a listen. I started the first one, and I binge listened to them for the next 2 days, like straight back to back, all 5 episodes, because it was the most in-depth explanation of the Oklahoma City bombing that I've ever heard. I've never heard some of the things that. What was the name of your guest again? Richard
Booth, who's I don't know if he's technically considered part of the Libertarian Institute, but he's basically their OKC guy. He has they have like an OKC archive there that he manages all of that. He's a big OKC researcher. I guess he's like kind of a sort of a protege of one of the main researchers that was involved in the OKC stuff in the beginning. I believe he's either a consultant or somehow was an assistant to the defense of McVeigh. Not to say that he has any sympathies for McVeigh, but just more like trying to expose the larger story. So
yeah, and there was a lot more to that story than I was ever aware of, and that guy's extensive, to say the least. I thought we dug deep on our shows. That was really good. And so I figured you spent the last 5 weeks or whatever talking about kind of that time frame. So why not come on and continue to talk about that time period?
Yeah, I do want to be very clear. I was born in 91, so you guys may be a little bit more equipped to actually speak to the feeling of the times. I was very young.
Well, I was telling him, I was born in 85, but I was very sheltered. So I don't really remember living, like I remember the events, but I don't remember like any personal feelings towards it or anything like that. So Bill's a little bit older, so he says that was when he kind of was
95. I had just graduated from high school, or I'd been out a year already, so already working on a military base, and I totally remember seeing all that stuff happen. So
but we didn't have you on to be a resident expert. We just had you on to talk about it because that's what we want to do.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about you before, like a quick intro of who Jose is. Since that's not really your real name, we'll just go with that.
Jose.
Who is quote unquote Jose?
Jose Galison. I'm just a dude who runs a podcast. I don't know. I got out of active duty military about over a year and some change. I don't know. I have like a libertarian-ish podcast, but I named it No Way Jose purposely because the fact that I didn't want to like pigeonhole myself, which is kind of, like I've done a lot of theory stuff. So, but I've also, now I'm kind of doing this. So I just kind of go whichever way my, I don't know, my current interests at the time are pulling me. which is why I'm kind of like now going down deep dive. Now I'm like reading a whole lot of stuff on like MK Ultra, because there are MK Ultra aspects of the OKC stuff. So like, I'm just a dude as a show that covers shit he wants to talk about, and that's really about it. So I don't know how I haven't got nuked off YouTube yet. I've covered just about every topic that you'd think would. I did. I don't know if I can say the N-word here, but I said the N-word. I did an episode covering the N-word Rogan thing. And, it was pretty great.
And we got nuked because we kept talking about vaccines. That's what we got nuked for. Yeah. So
I think the final nail was the election, though, wasn't it? That got us finally nuked. I don't think.
Oh yeah, they went back and dug back some old shit to nail the final nail in the coffin, and it was like election results and stuff. And it's just like that was like a year and a half old episode that we got nuked for, and it was retarded. So I'll get nuked for saying retarded.
Probably.
So that's okay.
It blows my mind. Some people do and some people don't, because I've covered that as well. I mean, maybe it's because I haven't gone too hard on the vaccine stuff, although I don't shy away from it. I just haven't done a whole lot of content covering it because it's pretty saturated and everyone's pretty much on it. So, just it's not really something that interests me all that much. I mean, it interests me, but not in like I'm going to do a dive on it. So,
So, we did the same thing. We just cover what's interesting to us at the time. We usually try to keep it somewhat relevant to today, but then some weeks when the news is just a repeated cycle every single week, we decide, hey, let's go back and talk about something else that's interesting.
Deep dive into something.
Yep. So this week we're going to take a more in-depth dive into this 90s era, because I find it interesting, and you don't hear a lot of people discussing it like you do like the 60s movements and things like that. But I feel like it was a pretty critical moment, almost like a turning point in U.S. politics. And I don't know this. I feel like we were almost at a cusp of a movement actually getting something done and accomplishing something. And then Oklahoma City happened, and it all kind of went away.
Yeah, which weirdly kind of like you were talking about the relevancy, and I guess you were kind of talking about like covering relevant topics. I actually feel like I think that's part of why my OKC. For one, I think Richard Booth has obviously done a great job, and I got lucky getting him. But I think part of why this story is hitting so hard right now is because I actually think it really speaks a lot to the times. Obviously, and we saw the Trump stuff. Who knows how that's going to fall out. There's already been articles of the Fed or not. I guess I say Fed boys, but it was the media. Which I mean, I don't know. Project Mockingbird. They're damn near all Feds to me. But I've already seen articles of like them like kind of implying like, oh no, like we're kind of keeping an eye out for domestic terrorist attacks and blah, blah. It's like, okay, they're already kind of starting the chatter. I literally would not be the least bit surprised if we see something like that. Because I mean, after covering this OKC stuff, I hesitate to say exactly what I think it was, but at the very least, the official narrative is complete horseshit, and the powers that be have their hands covered in a lot of blood in some way, shape, or form. Whether that's in a cover up or whether they actually did it. It's kind of hard to say. Honestly, I lean towards kind of actively did it, but there are ways to explain it based on the information we have, that it was maybe just some sort of oversight and just the fact that there's tiered levels of like intelligence within their ops, that maybe someone went rogue or changed some details or whatever, to where you can't necessarily say it was like an intentional like big Fed boy thing, maybe some lower level guys or something. But yeah, it is definitely, I think it is relevant to the times very much.
Does it seem to you that, because I mean, we had in the 80s, it was like basically owned by the Republicans, right? You had Reagan and then Bush, and then all of a sudden it's like 92, Clinton comes in, all of a sudden there's anti-government sentiment, right? Things die down when GW comes up, Obama's back in, all of a sudden the Tea Party's in full effect, more extremists, then Trump's in. I mean, yeah, the media doesn't like it, but whatever. And then all of a sudden Biden's in, and all of a sudden they're gearing up for something again.
Well, I had seen several articles that tied it to election cycles like that. It's like every time a Democrat's in office, all these right-wing militiamen come out in full force because they think they're going to take our guns and stuff. And it's just like, well, if they'd stop saying we're going to take your guns, maybe these people would stop thinking that they're going to take our guns.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually, like I told you, I've been going to MK Ultra deep dive. I've been looking at like the Manson stuff and like how that connects. And there definitely was, there was PatCon, which was happened during the 90s, which was like essentially the feds. It's stuff that's been complete, like it's basically confirmed. PatCon was a operation where they're infiltrating right-wing groups and fucking, I mean, I'm sure it would differ depending on who you ask what their true motive was, but the idea to infiltrate, have information, maybe muddy up their operations, whatever. They had ones prior to that where it's like a lot of people know COINTEL. And then you also have there was Operation K, or maybe it's not Operation, but it was Chaos is the other one, where they were kind of infiltrating the left, the Black Panthers, the hippies, stuff like that. So, but I do think maybe there's something to the fact that Trump, the reason why, because it kind of goes back and forth, and they're probably also doing both at the same time all the time.
Right.
I think there's definitely focuses depending on the era. Obviously, we're gonna have the right wing militias during the Clinton time, but I think Trump. I think they really had a hard time ginning up like a genuine opposition. Like, I mean, yeah, there was opposition, but it's like that NPC bullshit. Whereas like you had like the Black Panthers and the hippies, and they had some legitimate concerns, and they were actually like about that life. And then same thing with the right wing militias. Whereas like I just feel like the people who were like anti-Trump to the extreme just weren't really serious people in that way. So I think that's why we didn't really get a whole lot of that. So maybe it kind of broke the cycle in a certain sense, and that's why it's kind of extended the attack on the right wing. Not to sound kooky, it's kind of the two wings of the same bird type bullshit or whatever. Yeah.
Do you think, and you just kind of got my mind thinking here, do you think maybe, because there is some extreme sentiment on the left as well as the right with like Black Panthers or what was the Antifa back 2 or 3 years ago. Do you think, and then you have obviously the right, like the Boogs and stuff like that. Do you think the fact that the left is more like big government, more like take care of me, like welfare state type mentality, and the right is like more right extremists are going to be more like survivalists, or I'm going to go out in the woods and take care of myself. Do you think maybe that has to do, maybe that plays a part in the success or the amount of noise or the amount of maybe even fear that the government has towards the right more than the left groups, because the left kind of needs the government to survive. The right's like, fuck the government. We're going to go live in the woods by ourselves on a mountain.
Yeah, I definitely, I think that's probably a better way to put it than what I said, actually. Because, that definitely is the case. Like with the Antifa types, it's not really any sort of threat to the establishment in any way, shape, or form. Whereas like the Black Panthers and the hippies, they were very much like super hardcore anti-war. The Black Panthers were very much, like individualism. Yeah, sure, maybe it was coming from like a left-wing perspective in some senses. I believe Malcolm X was like kind of a little bit of a commie in some eras. I think he may have changed his thoughts along the way, but he very much was pushing like the idea of like, hey, let's come together as a community and kind of be independent and don't start no shit but don't take no shit kind of deal. But whereas the modern like Antifa, or I guess in a certain sense the modern day analog of the the left wing movement isn't really anything that I think they're actually genuinely concerned about. If anything, it just plays towards their ends. Like, yeah, I'm sure they've infiltrated Antifa groups, but I don't think it's for the thing of like, I don't think they're really trying to die it down. I think if anything, it's more just like that way they can kind of maybe antagonize shit a little bit.
Yeah,
so,
no, that makes sense.
So let's get into the 90s. The 90s to me was kind of a weird time. It was kind of a boiling point, like I was saying, because you had not just like the militia movements and like the Waco and Ruby Ridge, but you also had on the other side, you had like the Rodney King riots, and you had the Bill Clinton affair with Monica Lewinsky. There's just a lot of
OJ.
Yeah, OJ Simpson. There's a lot of craziness in the media during that time. And this was also conveniently the start of the 24-hour news cycle. So everything's being covered constantly, and like mass media is gaining some serious traction and some serious influence on people's lives, more than just like primetime television was with Walter Cronkite back in the 70s. We have like media just in your face constantly. And so it was just all this weirdness going on. And that's the 90s. But it was before kind of pre-internet. The internet was just kind of starting to take off, but it wasn't like everybody had the internet where everybody could get on and read about anything they want. So it was pre-internet, but still just the amount of media coverage was just insane at this time.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's part of why, I guess I bring it back to OKC and shit. That's kind of why that was so unique. I think what you're kind of describing was like an inflection point to where like the media was kind of, I think that's why looking back now at things like OKC, there's so much shit because they were in a position where I think the powers that be used to damn near act with like impunity and kind of just do whatever because no one really had the capability. For example, all the disparate information that came out of OKC has been like collected now, but like at the time, or if had it happened prior, it would have been harder for people to compile this type of information and make some sort of compelling case. Whereas like the 90s were kind of like that inflection point where it became possible. So I think like what is kind of in a kind of way is, I guess I say magical, but like in this sense, in this context, is that like OKC happened right at the time where they were still being sloppy, but at the same time, it was like right at this boom where we were starting to get the capabilities to actually be able to collect information this way, or at least have the remnants of it. So now we're able to. Whereas you look back at stuff like JFK and stuff like that, it's way harder to get some of that information.
Yeah, you
although people do.
Grainy ass video footage of his brains getting blown out on the back of the car that you can't really make out what it is. But I mean, it's there, but it's not like you're saying what we have now or what was starting to pick up in the 90s. The other thing that picked up major in the 90s was the lack of trust in the government was at an all-time low. I've got this graphic right here of falling trust in the government from 1960 to 2014. Let me pull this one up for y'all to see. Is it gonna pull up? There it is. So this says Americans have been asked since 1958 if they trust the government in Washington to do what's right. So if you look, and this is kind of surprising to me, at the beginning of the 60s, you're at like 75, 80% of the people are like, yeah, I trust the government. And I'm surprised with the way the 60s were with all the MK Ultra stuff, with the JFK stuff, with all the stuff. I'm surprised it fell as slowly as it did, because you're talking a 20-year decline here to the early 80s.
They're coming out of, Eisenhower, who is pretty trustworthy as a president. As far as public perception goes, it wasn't until, you get to the protest, the civil rights, and then you get Johnson. Johnson, and then I think Johnson really is when trust started to kind of decline.
Well, I feel like a lot of this decline here coincides with the Vietnam War.
Yeah, absolutely.
It kind of follows suit, and it got pretty low right at 1980. There was major economic issues in the early 80s, and then Reagan came back in, and you see kind of a spike here, and then the 90s hit, and all-time low, like 18%, it looks like, trusted the government, and it stayed down there until this unit. Can you guess what this giant spike here probably was?
2001.
9/11, I'm guessing. Yes. And 9/11 brought the whole country back together.
Convenient.
It's like events like that that's just like we got to bring the trust back. So whatever conspiracy theory you do or don't believe, it was definitely used as propaganda to pull America back together. Then it spiked, jumped back down. But so what do you think? What do you think caused this low dip in the 90s, Jose? Do you have any thoughts of what may have started that? Was it economic reasons? Was it social reasons? Or
was it Clinton?
Was it Clinton? Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to say. Like I said, because it's I'm not a big history buff, and so. But obviously, looking at those time frames, I guess you had what was it? I guess it kind of looks like it was starting before then, though, because OKC was 95. I know you had Waco, which was probably a year or two prior.
Yeah, I think it was 93.
And then you had Ruby Ridge, which I assume was probably at least a year prior to that.
Yeah, I think it was 92. I think it was 92, 93, 95.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that those kind of garnered that sort of large, I don't know, social awareness. So I mean, I feel like there must have been other stuff going on. I'm really bad at my history, so I don't know.
Everybody, of course, loved Reagan even after the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, nobody, Reagan didn't lose any distrust or any trust. And then when Bush came in, Bush, the first Gulf War had a lot of public support, going after Saddam Hussein. He was the big bad guy. That's the way they made it portrayed. So, and I remember, all the kids in school were all excited about the Gulf War. And then, the big hit that he took was he promised he wasn't going to raise taxes, and he did. And then Ross Perot ran against him, which caused him to lose to Clinton, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know if a lot of Clinton's information came out about him at the time, but I know he was involved in a lot of corruption in Arkansas.
The Whitewater stuff had come out right before. And there was all kinds of stuff going on. And I know almost immediately they started pushing like the assault weapons ban, the crime bills and stuff started going through then. Cause connecting this to like today, crime was through the fucking roof in the 90s too.
It started to come down towards the end of the 80s. I wonder if it had something to do with the fact that Russia was no longer our big bad guy. So people stopped looking overseas and started looking back over here. Right.
And when did Russia collapse? I forget.
89?
Yeah. 89? Okay, that sounds right. Yeah.
End of the 80s. Then, and maybe, you look at the 2000s there when we start pulling out when we start realizing these wars are bullshit, and then we start pulling out of these, and then we start looking home again, and we got that nice low spike there here in the 2014 till now. I'd like to see what this graphic looks like today, because it doesn't even include Trump's administration or any of Biden's administration. So I'd like to see how that would if make it spikes sense. And drops during Trump and Biden.
Or whenever there's not some big international conflict, not some big bad guy, all of a sudden, we look back over here and nobody trusts the government again.
It's like, oh wait, they're still doing shitty
they still
things.
Suck.
Yes. But back to what you were talking about with Ruby Ridge, a lot of, if you look into like the militia movements and if you just Google like anti-government sentiments of the 90s, a lot of them do put the starting point at Ruby Ridge. And I don't feel like that's the kickoff point. That's maybe like the publicized, like when it started being like mainstream in your face publicized, because the reason why he moved to a damn mountain is because he didn't trust the damn government. They claim it's because he was having he had like apocalyptic beliefs and stuff, but in reality, I've heard that the state, I think he was here in Iowa or in Illinois, but the state he was in started cracking down on homeschools and making it harder to homeschool. And he's like, I don't want you to tell me how to freaking raise my kids. So that's why he moved to a damn mountain in Idaho.
No, and I had talked. So my kids are homeschooled, and so I was speaking with one of the administrators over here in Iowa, and she said yes, like mid 80s, late 80s, like there was like a homeschool war with the government to try to get the freedom to be able to homeschool. And she said, she was a part of that, but she said that it got really down and dirty for a while.
Really? So there's the government kind of encroaching more on that personal life, like that independent lifestyle. I feel like maybe that started happening more in the 90s.
And this isn't something I'm aware of. I'd have to look into it a lot, but I know like a lot of like libertarians and anarchists really felt Reagan was very fascist and very big brother. And so that's where I think a lot of people started to go underground a little bit. He gave this patriotic sense and the right loved him, but I think those that leaned more libertarian really felt like he was a little bit too domineering, and so they wanted to kind of get off the grid as much as possible.
Okay. It's my understanding he started going to shit near the end of his administration too, in that regard. That's my understanding. So
and
he
I
was
think
pretty good in the beginning. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was his dementia kicking in, and probably Bush taking over a little bit more. His CIA background.
Well, yeah. Then Bush came in as soon as he took over office and was like, "We're bringing in New World Order," and everybody's like.
Hey. Yeah, what? And that line is probably what people were like, "Fuck,"
Hey, this is really to add into the whole discussion of the trust in government. I think that's around the time they started really cracking down on the crack stuff. because I know that was a big thing with Bush Senior. Is he made a few big ones. Like I think if I vaguely remember something about him like having a thing where he had a baggie of crack, and like it was some guy they set up in a sting, and I remember like that was a big aspect of him was the crack shit. I think Reagan did as well too. I think he started kicking that off a little bit.
Yeah,
so
because Nancy Reagan was the one that was. I mean, she was the first lady that was all about the say no to drugs, and this is your brain on drugs, and yeah. So it was like the mid to late '80s when the Reagan administration really started kicking into that.
Which is ironic because it's like a kind of one of the deeper conspiracies. She was really into black dudes in that way.
Maybe she just wanted her boyfriend to get off the crack.
Or she wanted his business to thrive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's possible too.
But I think it was the 80s where, because remember our troops went into Panama, and there was the first big push against the cartels at the time in Honduras and Panama. And and so I there was rumors, that's when CIA was really in the thick of their drug business, in South America and over in Afghanistan and stuff. So I'm sure, there's something to that.
Well, I know, like I started to say earlier, I know there was also like the Biden crime bill came out about this time, and then the '94 federal assault weapons ban came out, and then a lot of right wingers were against that. Right. They're coming after our guns. Yeah. I mean, they literally came after our guns. Right. So a lot of the militia movement formed around that time period, and a lot of people peg it on like the assault weapons ban and other. I think they made it harder to purchase. I think that's when background checks came out for like handgun purchases and stuff too. So a lot of federal gun laws came out during that time.
And I wonder if, and just thinking about this, but when you look at like the Vietnam vets coming back over, at the end of '70s, beginning of the '80s, and then just the mistrust in the government with that, I'm wondering if that kind of
carried on,
carried on, and they started kind of getting together in these militia groups. So
let's talk a little bit about the militia movement of the '90s, because I got this interesting article. Obviously, it is not pro-militia movement because it's trying to tie like the 2020s militia movement into. They're basically saying, oh, they kind of went underground and now they're like revived militia movement. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the case, but this is from ADL.org, which I don't know what that is, but it's titled The Militia Movement 2020. Simple. So it says the origins, the militia movement in the United States is a right-wing extremist movement with an anti-government ideology and a strong emphasis on paramilitary activity. It emerged in '93 to '94, quickly engaging in criminal activity, often centered around illegal weapons and explosives and violence. What do you think about that first couple sentences there?
I think everything's cool except for the and violence part. They sound like a pretty cool group so far.
And it makes you wonder, like, how much and violence actually was taking place. Are they just tying like Oklahoma City bombing into that? And like, how much explosives were actually like? I honestly don't know, and I'm cynical of it, but I know they kind of exaggerate things to make things look way worse than they are. They may have been a pretty violent group, but you think you'd have heard more stories about it than just.
But when you look like in the '60s with like the Weather Underground and like the Black Panthers and the bombings of federal buildings that took place in the '60s, and you compare that with the bombings of federal buildings in the '90s, you had one compared to a dozen.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the FBI was just doing a bang up job in the '90s and thwarting those.
Right.
Like, these things have too many moving factors now. We're going to get caught. Back then in the 60s, they could do whatever,
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
Free for all.
So it goes on. It says, after a significant slump in the early 2000s, the militia movement experienced a second major growth spurt starting in 2008. So that would be the Obama era that we were talking, kind of the ups and downs. Says the origins of the militia movement are rooted in long-standing traditions within the American far right, as well as the reactions of anti-government extremists to certain specific events and controversies of the 1990s. Says the militia movement is heir to a long tradition of far-right paramilitary activity, including pre-World War II extreme right-wing groups such as the Silver Shirt Legion and the Christian Front in America. Let's get into the 90s because it really digs into from World War II up till the 90s, and we don't have all day for this.
Sure.
Says specific events played a key role in the formation of the militia movement. These include events such as the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement and the 1992 election of Bill Clinton. So I didn't even think about
NAFTA.
The NAFTA. That would be, I mean, you have George Bush come in and say, we're going to have a new world order. Then all of a sudden you have NAFTA come out and people that have this anti-globalist conspiracy mindset. Yeah, that would instantly look like, hey, they're trying to
That'd be my first
implement a new world order. Do you know anything much about NAFTA, Jose?
Not enough to really speak on it too much. I just know it was a whole trade
man.
agreement thing, really consolidated a lot of shit, you know, in a monopolistic type fashion. But no, I really can't speak about it in length.
So a lot of the, if you really start digging into the stuff, a lot of the anti-globalist movement, they say at least sparked from like earlier on anti-Semitic sentiment, like the what the Zog, the Zionist, what's that Zionist
organized or
occupied, Zionist occupied government.
Yeah, just like, I mean, Zog is just like essentially the Nazi connotation of our current world order. So I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people. I mean, I made a joke on my other show, Tire Power, I think recently, about how like I do have sympathies with some of the alt-right types because it's like you're like no. Like, I mean, I get it how you see all these connections, and then you go fucking Jews. It's like no. Israel. These are different things.
Yes, there's difference. There's a big difference, and
but it's important.
I think it's far stretching to say that everybody that's against, because I actually read something the other day that said the fear of globalism is a dog whistle to anti-Semitism, and I'm like, I don't really,
not really.
I never say that I'm against globalism and think I hate the fucking Jews.
Right.
Just doesn't cross my mind. Maybe
that's the whole different reasons.
Maybe subconsciously, I don't realize that that's what I'm saying, but I do see how it kind of probably evolved out of that mindset.
I mean, I do when I say it, but when I say the Jews, I mean Israel, because it's just it's way harder in my head to be like, well, fuck, the fucking government of Israel. Like it just doesn't roll off the tongue very well. You know what I mean?
Sure. That's fair. That's fair. So at this time, it was when it seemed like one world government was kind of like when because there was the NAFTA, and then the EU formed in the late 90s. And so I remember that sentiment, like, well, here it comes. Here comes the, like, what Revelation talked about, like the one world government, one currency, and all that stuff. That's what they're trying to push here. I remember that sentiment, and I still feel like that's what I don't feel like it's a conspiracy theory to say that they're trying to push a one world government with one currency, because that's what literally what they're doing.
Right.
That's what every empire attempts to do for the most part.
Yeah.
So
So let's get back into this. Talks about the especially important were two pieces of gun control legislation and two deadly standoffs with law enforcement. One of the gun control measures was the so-called Brady Law, which was the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which passed in '93. And then it says, among other things, it required people wishing to purchase handguns to pass a background check. I like how they say, among other things, it's just background checks. It's like, well, what were the other things?
What were the other things
those
you're throwing in there?
Are probably significant.
Yeah.
It goes on to say the other was the '94 Public Safety and Recreational Firearms Use Protection Act, or the assault ban, which they say it all flowery.
Yeah.
With recreational firearms protection. We're protecting recreational firearms, but we're taking everything else away. Says these acts greatly angered anti-government extremists who argued that they were the first steps towards mass gun confiscation by the government.
Yeah.
you hear those same sentiments today. So like you were saying at the beginning, this all applies kind of today. Everything that's happening in the 90s is still happening today.
When did the Brady bill go through?
93.
93. Yeah, and it's funny because that's based on the attempted assassination of Reagan.
Really?
Yeah. So it's funny that they waited nearly a decade to push something through saying, hey, it's Brady, so it's just funny.
Fun aside, did you guys see that the assassin or the attempted assassin of Reagan has been having a hard time getting music gigs now he's gone out? People just really won't let it go that he missed.
Really? What, is he trying to be a country singer? Because that might,
right?
He might not really fit in with the country music
Maybe if
crowd.
he teamed up with the Dixie Chicks.
I'm not quite sure what his genre is, but I know he's a big musician, and I know that's been a big thing. A lot of people followed him when he got out. Just
I forgot that he got out.
That's kind of like Charles Manson trying to be an accomplished musician, as he did.
Which he was, yeah.
Yes. So this goes on and says, also fanning the fury on the right, where the 92 Ruby Ridge standoff in Idaho involving a white supremacist, Randy Weaver, who refused to appear in federal court to face a weapons charge. Let's start there.
Yes, let's
start, because everybody's making this kind of the kickoff point of the militia movement, even though I think we've concluded that that's not.
Right.
This is just the publicization of it. This kind of glosses over the actual events that happen and why people would possibly have some sort of mistrust in the government. So the story goes something like this. Yes, Randy Weaver is an admitted racist. He says, "I am a racist."
What did he though? Because I vaguely remember something recently where I think a lot of that. I'm talking on my ass completely, but I vaguely remember going on a deep dive a while ago, and I think people were kind of implying it through implication from the groups that he was hanging out with. Although I might be wrong, I vaguely remember something like that from some of my digging. But I don't know. Maybe someone out there. Even that's kind of dubious, because then when even if he says he's something like that, there's so many gradations of what white supremacist really even means. Because I don't know. People say shit like Ben Shapiro's a white supremacist. So I pretty much anytime I hear the accusation white supremacist, I just kind of roll my eyes and go, probably not.
So from what I read, which was supposedly a quote from him, which I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me, he basically said, yeah, I am kind of a racist. I don't hate anybody. I'm not like spewing hate. I don't want violence on anybody. I just wanted to go fucking be by myself is basically what he said. And I said this on Justin Lightheart's podcast, the Fact Check This podcast the other day. Justin Campbell. Yes, we have too many Justins in our sphere that we've had on our show. We've had like 4 Justins on our show. Sorry, Justin Campbell of the Fact Check This podcast. I knew I was going to get that wrong, but I basically
1521 on Twitter. Anyone wants to follow?
There you go. Go follow the Fact Check This podcast because it's great too. Basically, I said I don't have a fucking problem with that kind of race. Like I will defend closeted racism because I don't see an issue with it. It's like if you have a racist inclination in your head and nobody knows it, who the fuck are you hurting? Or if you're like, I don't like black people, I'm going to go live on a mountain away from them. Okay, that's your own prerogative to do that. You're probably hurting yourself more than anybody else by isolating yourself from everybody, but just go freaking do it. Who cares? So if he was that kind of racist that he claimed to be, or at least some quotes say he claimed to be, that had literally nothing to do with Ruby Ridge whatsoever, other than the fact that maybe that's what pushed him up on the mountain to start with. What put him in this situation with the ATF and the FBI is he was kind of hanging out with supposedly some like Aryan Nation groups or some white supremacist groups, because that's what was in the area. And the FBI was trying to infiltrate the Aryan Nations. And so they came to Randy Weaver. They had an infiltrator, like a spy in the Aryan Nations, who came up to Randy Weaver and was like, hey, I heard you're trying to make some money. I need somebody to saw off a shotgun. Do you know how to do this? And he's like, well, yeah, dumbass. You just take a saw and you saw it off. And so he sawed off a couple shotguns. The guy gave him money for it. entrapment right there. They're like, oh, federal weapons charges. We're going to arrest you unless you cooperate with us and turn over some of your Aryan Nation buddies and cooperate with the FBI. Randy Weaver didn't like that too much, so he went up to his mountain and hid on a mountain. So when they say he refused to appear in federal court to face weapons charge, it's like, well, the FBI is capable of doing this to entrap me. What else how do I trust that I'm going to get a fucking fair trial to show up to this court appearance when they entrapped me in the first place?
On that too, once again, talking on my ass is just shit I'm remembering, so I'm not saying it's any sort of sense of authority.
That's fine. That's all I'm doing too.
Yeah, so definitely fact check me or whatever. But fuck it, I'm almost certain they changed the date. They changed the date of the court appearance, and I believe that they didn't notify him. So that was the other thing. It was kind of this like, I don't know if they did that on purpose, if that was just happenstance, but they kind of possibly tricked him / maybe fucked up.
They probably were like, well, we tried to call him on the phone to tell him, but Randy Weaver doesn't have a freaking telephone up there. So they're like, I guess that's his fault. And so then this warrant went out for his arrest. The ATF tried getting up this mountain they saw him as this dire threat. And Randy Weaver was paranoid as fuck because, like I said, how do you trust a government that lures you into committing a crime that you never had any intentions of committing in the first place? Like, how do you trust that, hey, I'm going to get a fair shot here. I'm going to get a fair trial by a jury. They already just fucked you up the ass. How are you going to trust that? So he's paranoid, and they're scouting out his mountain constantly, and they see that they're in and out with guns because they're gun lovers. You got something there?
Well, so all I see with reference to him being a white supremacist is it says that he moved to northern Idaho in an area that was known to host settlements of far right white supremacists.
Yeah, there was basically a white supremacist boys club there that met every year. All the white supremacists come and hung out.
Yeah, he had a buddy who I guess presided over the Aryan Nations compound, which was kind of neighbors to him. And that's all it says really about it.
I do remember from this vaguely. I wish I could remember where I heard this, but they were kind of implying that he was kind of in those groups. And they weren't, and if I remember correctly, whatever I was listening to, they weren't saying that he necessarily wasn't a white supremacist, but it was also that was the social groups he had to hang out with there.
Yeah, so that's what was there at the time. So
they were militia groups in the fucking woods, and that was your only option. So it's not, from my understanding, the implication I was getting from that is it's not really an out and out thing that he was. It's the same thing they do with the modern Boog movement. They try to all the time imply it's some sort of white supremacist thing, which, I mean, probably the most notable Boog guy is Magnus Pinvidia, which is a mutualist, which is kind of weird mix between ANCAP and commie. So that's definitely not the case. And if anyone who paid attention to the Boog movement knew, there were factions who were sort of white supremacist-ish, but the vast larger group of the Boog people would usually, pick on them and make fun of them and tell them to fuck off. I don't know if that was contrived by feds or not. Either way, they weren't big fans of it, but that's what happens.
So you see in all of these, a lot of these instances where these groups had ties to white supremacist groups. Do you think that is the media trying to portray them as worse than they were, or do you think there is more prevalence of white supremacy in those groups? What's the connection here to white supremacy? Because that is the foundation of it when you read these articles.
I think they're saying oh, look at the compound. Do you see any white person or black person living in that compound? Obviously, they're racist.
Obviously, you're gonna, especially in the 90s, 30 years ago, you're gonna find racists everywhere. But do you feel, I heard you kind of touch on it a little on your OKC one, that you kind of were skeptical of how much they push white supremacy on these groups?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it is both in a sense, but far more the former than the latter. The former being they're trying to build up a bigger threat, the latter being that it's that there are actual white supremacists. Obviously in right-wing majority white, any sort of movement, there's probably going to be a higher prevalence of white supremacists. Just like in a further left, more like larger African American, there'll probably be a higher chance of there being, you know, black supremacists, just like there were in the Black Panthers. And you know what? You said you defend in the closet racism before. I will defend out and out racism as long as you aren't fucking with anybody. I don't care. You know, like you can be an out and out racist, open about it, as long as you aren't like in any way, you know, using coercive or using force in any way against people that you don't like. I don't give a shit. I'm just not going to hang out with you probably. And the same thing goes for the Black Panthers. I mean, no one, I feel like in a modern sense, if you brought up that like, hey, to some normie that, hey, the Black Panthers were, you know, there was a high prevalence, a lot of people really hating on fucking white people. No one gives a shit. So it's like, I don't get why when the reverse happens, it's this big, oh my God, like, who cares? Like, unless they're trying to in any way, which I guess they're kind of implying here, they're white supremacist militia groups. But I mean, I don't know. Let's be real. They're like, okay.
How many of them were actually militia groups, like for the sole intent of let's go kill a bunch of black people? I mean, you never hear that. It was all anti-government sentiment was the majority of these militia movements. It's like which a lot of these articles, specifically this one, basically says the baseless claim that the Constitution gives them the right to form an unorganized militia. And it's like, that wasn't, as far as, again, like you keep saying, talking out my ass, I don't know their mindset back then, but from what it looks like, none of them were like KKK, like let's form this group and go kill a bunch of black people. Like it was like, we hate the fucking government. And they might have had some anti-Zog sentiment, which would constitute as white supremacy, I guess, or anti-Semitism.
I mean, it said that they're, you know, very fundamental Christian, right? Very, very old school. And even said, well, and they referred to God as Yahweh, right? Like that's a bad thing. Yeah. So,
but like I said, even if there is racism there, I don't think it, like, you're taken away from the fact that they're anti-government. And that was the big threat to the government. It wasn't that, hey, these are white supremacists, they want to kill black. No, it's like, they're coming after us, guys.
Well, but I mean, if you portray it like, okay, well, they're anti-government,
then people might actually
ask questions,
respect that.
Right? Well, and people might ask questions. Well, why don't you trust the government? But if you say, well, they're racist, no one's going to be like, well, why are you racist? You know, I mean, they're just going to be like, oh, well, they're bad people. Right.
On the white supremacist thing in relation to the 90s, I mean, once again, just speaking to, you know, the little bit of digging I've done the OKC, my impression is there was some actual white supremacist group. For example, Timothy McVeigh was like basically in Elohim City, which I guess is kind of near OKC. That's kind of where his base of operations was. And they were a legitimate fucking white supremacist group, and I forget what they were robbing, but they were robbing shit to I mean, it's kind of implied to, you know, garner up funds for whatever weird shit they were doing. But at the same time, though, it's hard to know to what extent that was genuine. Not to say there weren't actual legitimate white supremacists in those groups, but how many of those were feds and how many of those were, you know, actual legitimate white supremacists? Because I mean, that's a big part of, like, I've done that series is I think we've done over 7 hours now, and we still have more episodes to do. Probably 2 or 3 more episodes. We'll probably be over 10 hours when we're done. And a lot of those is covering the individual characters, you know, the accomplices or implied accomplices of Timothy McVeigh. A lot of people he was associating with, and those people glow like the fucking sun. And these were a lot of the people that were in, you know, in that same, or some of them were in that same, like, white supremacist groups. And these were people that had, you know, Fed connections out the ass to the point where, like, come on, this dude's a Fed. You know, you can't. I mean, like, okay, 1, 2 Fed connections, okay, but you get to a certain point, like, all right, this guy's a Fed. And that was the case with almost all of them. So I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, I'm sure maybe there were some genuine. And I'm sure, like, you know, with that group, there probably was, for example, Terry Nichols. Although I don't know to what extent Terry Nichols was involved in the white supremacist aspects or whatever, but he was, you know, the main accomplice. Even that's part of the official story. Like, he's doing, like, I think, like, life in prison right now, and he won't speak for the life of him because he's, you know, genuinely concerned for the safety of his family, and I don't blame him. But it sounds to me, when you hear his story, he kind of sounds like the dupe, kind of when you learn about him. Like most of the other characters were like, kind of look like they glowed, whereas like he just kind of seems like a dupe who kind of got sucked into it, and I think he got in over his head, and he was kind of like, well, I kind of have to, or they're going to probably murder my entire family. So and he just kind of went along to get along. So there's definitely some aspect of how much are feds, how much are just useful idiots. It's hard to tell. I also think there's differing levels, because like I know one of the big theories with McVeigh was that he survived, because a lot of people think that like he lived because they thought he was out and out glowy, and I do think he was a glowy to some level, but I think it's like a tiered thing to where like I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if he had handlers who are like, hey man, just go along with the story,
right?
Like what's up? We'll look you up.
But then at the end of the day, it's like, well, that guy, we can't have him talking, so just let him take the fall. At the end of the day, it's like you got to take the fucking fall. It's kind of like JFK's assassin. What was his name?
Oswald.
Yeah, it's just like that guy had to die, even if he wasn't the guy that shot him, even if he was like an inside guy, which he seemed probably like a useful idiot type too.
Oh, absolutely.
At the end of the day, he had to go. He had to fucking die too.
Who then got offed by Jack Ruby, who then claimed to have no memory whatsoever of the event, and apparently shortly after getting visited by Jolly West in prison, essentially went fully fucking insane. Which anyone knows Jolly West, that's a big MK Ultra guys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of MK Ultra stuff, and I wonder how much of that like bled into the 90s with some of the stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
And like you were saying earlier, is information spreading more rapidly, and you can actually like preserve some of that information. So a lot of that stuff that they could cover up and be like, no, that never fucking happened. I mean, they tried with Oklahoma City, they tried with Waco, and all these things, and a lot of people at this point, it's like, no, that's not what happened. We remember you saying this. That's the one benefit of the 24-hour news cycle is we heard you fucking say this. And then they come on, they're like, oh, no, we never said that at all. And it's like, what are you talking? I got video cassette tapes that show you saying.
The big thing with the OKC thing was the John Doe 2 thing. I think if it wasn't for them doing the John Doe thing, this probably would, for the most part, other than crazy conspiracy people, be shuttled off to the back. Whereas I feel like we're in this weird era where I think OKC is kind of rising to where even normies are kind of like, this is bullshit. And I think it's largely responsible for the John Doe 2 aspect, because anyone who recollects OKC knows that was a big thing. Immediately, they were like, there's a second person. And I think within like a day or two, or actually, I don't remember how long it was, but then the feds just like, nope, no John Doe 2. Yep, just kidding. We were wrong. And it was like, you were in that era of the 24-hour news cycle. And people were like, you've been saying what do you mean there's not a John Doe 2? And then in a lot of the trials and stuff, they tried to skirt around it, not focus on it. That was a big thing, is I guess with the cases, they were trying to just go after Tim McVeigh, not going any accomplices. And anyone in the know was like, there are definitely accomplices here, aside from just Terry Nichols. So
right. Well, to finish up a little bit on Ruby Ridge, because it's about time we get into a break, but I had a few more things. You talked about the useful idiot. I think that's kind of what they were hoping to make Randy Weaver into, was the useful idiot, by suckering him into sawing off shotguns, which I'm sure that was happening all the time up there. Like, we'll mess around with a gun. I think at one point they asked him to do something even more incriminating before this. Maybe make a gun like fully auto or something. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's fucking illegal. And then same guy comes back. He's like, well, what about, can you saw off, do you know how to saw off shotguns? And you'd think maybe he was somewhat of a useful idiot, because you think after he came back the second time, it's like, well, if you can't do that incriminating thing, what about this? You think he'd be like, you're a little fishy, man. You're like, especially it's just like, who can't fucking saw off a shotgun on their own?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like exactly what it says. You saw off a shotgun.
I mean, but to be fair, in our modern sentiment, especially all of us here, we know, like, hey, if anyone's asked you to do something illegal that you're not like really close with, that's a fucking fed. Whereas in that time they didn't have that. I feel like a lot of this hadn't been lessons learned or been part of the larger consciousness. You know what I mean?
I was skeptical of a guy I met at the gym who's like, man, I really wish there was some kind of group I could get networked in with, like kind of, kind of not really trust the government, kind of someone, I'm like, oh yeah.
It's like, that guy's a Fed.
I know. It's like, I'm sorry, man.
Do you know of any like militia groups
Right.
around that I'm really trying to get involved in?
Because the government sucks.
I mean, to be real, especially in this liberty movement, whatever space we're in, I'm not gonna lie, I'm skeptical of everyone being feds. But how I generally operate is I don't say anything to anybody that I wouldn't say to an undercover agent. And aside from that, I treat everyone as if they're not. So and you're good. Like, a lot of people in our group try to go on witch hunts of like, this guy's a Fed, that guy's a Fed, and I almost never engage in that. Aside from maybe like Sarwalk or something, but like, there's a certain preponderance of evidence where you're like, okay, this dude's a Fed.
Hell is popping up. So this last article, I'm not going to read it, but this kind of is why this says everything of what they think the militia movement was founded on, because it says Ruby Ridge, the day American militia movement was born. And this one gets into a little bit more backstory into it, but it ties it to today's militia movement too. But it pretty much said it glosses over the starting point of the Randy Weaver situation too, because it says on August 21st, the marshals went to a location that became known as Ruby Ridge to scout a location where they might ambush a fugitive, Randy Weaver. Again, they put on here, because then it goes on to say they pretty much botched this, then botched Waco, and that's why people stopped trusting the government. It's like, you're missing the whole fact that the government is entrapping its own citizens and trying to put them, like, lock them up for things that they sucker them into, and they're still doing it to this day. Like, we've talked several weeks in a row about the governor of Michigan, how that was a big FBI setup thing where it was all started by the FBI. It was all implemented by the FBI to suck in all these militia people funded by the FBI. And it's like, how do you put the fact that they fucked up this raid as the start of the anti-government sentiment? No, it's the fact that the government is doing shitty things that got people losing trust in the first
Jose,
place.
do you have a opinion? Why did they go after Randy Weaver? So was it just to like send a message? Because from what I read, like the snipers that were on site were like, they've never seen like shoot to kill orders that strict.
Yeah, well, yeah. After, if you don't know the whole story, they sneak up the mountain. They're scouting out. The dog starts going nuts. So they start to go see what the dog's chasing. The marshal shoots the dog. 14-year-old boy says, "You son of a bitch, you killed my dog," and shoots the marshal. I mean, they're dressed in military fatigues. No, it doesn't say ATF on them. It's just these random dudes. I mean, these people, like I said, are already paranoid as hell that the government's coming after them or somebody's coming after them. And there's just these random dudes on your property in military with guns, and they just shot your dog. I'd shoot the fucker too.
Oh yeah, fuck yeah.
I mean, I'm probably on a list for that now. And so then they pulled back. And then, yeah, like you said, they had for the first, they don't even have these orders in combat in Iraq.
Yeah.
If you see a guy holding a gun, shoot to kill.
Right. Yeah.
Whether he's like a direct threat or not, if he's walking, if he possesses a weapon, shoot to kill. Your orders are shoot to kill.
And the sniper's like, I've been on 300 raids and I've never had this order before.
What's your take on that? I know you asked him that first, and I took over.
I don't really know too much. It's kind of hard to say. I just had Brandon Caserta, who was like the main guy or the kind of the poster boy of the whole Michigan Whitmer plot thing. He kind of talked on the entrapment aspect, and from him it was like they didn't even really have anything. So it's like, because I brought up in that, it's kind of like, it's almost like this game they play. The feds were like, hey, we got to entrap you. But it's almost like they didn't even honor up their side of the deal there. So where it's like they even really entrapped them. Not to say it was even okay if you entrap them, but it's like they didn't even really, check that minimal box. But yeah, I don't know with the Weaver thing. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say the reason they went so hard was just the aspect of like, oh, fuck. I don't know if they just thought, we're going to go in here with military tactical precision and we're going to fucking, cuff them and get out of here or whatever. But I think once, bullets started flying, they were like, oh shit, we're in the fucking we're in the mountains. We're fucking, we're not in our element. We could sustain some serious loss here, which they could. I mean, anyone who's been in like the woods and the mountains, like, I mean, like, you just need a few good men, and you could probably damn near hold off SEAL Team 6, because they're not prepared for that environment. They're not familiar with it. I mean, the terrain does most of the shit for you. So I could see why they'd be, not saying what they did was okay, but I could see why they'd be like, oh shit, we fucked up. This is going to get out of hand if we don't, handle it quickly. I can't really conjecture too much on why. I mean, it's hard to say. There could be more in the
Right.
back. I mean, maybe they're just that upset that he said, basically, said fuck you to them. I don't know.
Well, the last thing before we go to break, because we're overdue. The thing that gets me the most is trapped into sawing off shotguns. I keep going back to there. He was a fugitive for like 2 fucking years. And they were so like hell bent on taking this guy in. It was like it basically to prove a point is what I think. It's just like, well, we can't just have this guy up here like sticking it to us. It's just like, what? I mean, in that 2 years, did he do anything else that would warrant you going in and like murdering his family, or you going in? Like, eventually, the guy's gonna probably come down from the mountain and. Even if you don't arrest him and he's just holed up on a mountain, it's basically jail anyway for him and his family. Like, who fucking cares? He didn't hurt anybody. That goes back to the libertarian principles of victimless crimes. This was totally a victimless crime, and they spent 2 fucking years trying to get this guy down from the mountain until it turned into a full-out military assault just for a guy sawing off a couple of fucking shotguns.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know to what extent. It's so hard because I've devoured a lot of this content, and I don't remember what is. A lot of this stuff blends in together. I know with Waco, the ATF was really trying to get a win. I vaguely remember someone making the case too. They were trying to do the same thing with Ruby Ridge, where it's trying to be this big, look at us with our big dicks and our guns, and look how awesome we are. And they fucked up, and then ironically tried to do it with Waco again, fucked up, and then they kind of sort of pulled it off with OKC, where now we're like, okay, we see you.
Yeah. Well, from what I've collected and gathered and read, basically Ruby Ridge was like, this guy's sticking it to us. We can't have that. Let's swing our dicks harder. And then they fucked up so badly that when Waco happened, the ATF and FBI was like, we need to make a big public spectacle of this to get back in the favor of the people. And so that's why instead of arresting David Koresh on the streets, which he was known to go jogging in town like daily, they could have arrested him peacefully at any point. They decide to do this big like televised raid on his compound there. And it's just like, well, we got to make a big spectacle of this to show our force or to get back on and have a win is basically what that was. And then they
murder 86 people.
Brutally fucked that one up too.
I really want to, before, I know you're about trying to go on break, but I do want to make it clear, this isn't I know we think we're talking about like the 90s, so people might think like, oh, this is, and like Waco and like, oh, they make these big spectacles or whatever, that was in the past. No, they're not above doing it now. I mean, anyone's familiar with Duncan Lemp's story? They fucking, I mean, yeah, it wasn't the grand extent of like Waco, but he lived in like a fucking middle-class suburban house, and they fucking broke into his window and fucking, killed him through his window essentially, and laying next to his pregnant girlfriend.
Yeah,
which once again, I've actually had his girlfriend at the time, his mother of his child on my show not too long ago. So, but yeah,
I mean, you look at these events back in the 90s, and it doesn't. To me, it's not like, oh, that's how they were in the past. The government doesn't change tactics,
right?
I mean, they might like change the visibility of it some, but it makes me think, what are they capable? If they're capable of this, what else are they capable of? Because I know they're capable of more than what they actually do. So it's like, what the fuck are they capable of?
And again, it seems like, they, for the last couple of years, they've been really trying to gear up, like January 6th, the social media purge, this whole like, oh, this right wing rise up that's coming, and they have to be prepared for, the whole domestic terrorist thing that, Homeland Security is getting ready for and everything. So,
right. We do got to get to break. You still got more time, Jose, after the break?
Yeah,
all right. We usually take 4 or 5 minutes to refresh our drinks and stuff and give people a chance to soak it in. And then we'll be back and we'll keep talking about shit. So We'll be right back.
Have you ever thought that maybe voting, maybe all this politics constantly surrounding you is not the way to achieve freedom in your life? Hi, I'm Remso W. Martinez, and I ask myself the same question. That's why I'm on a journey to find true freedom in my lifetime. From learning about financial independence, to new ways to develop rugged individualism, to amazing guests living strange, crazy, amazing lifestyles that you've only thought might be real, but actually are. Go ahead and check out my new show, On the Run with Remso W. Martinez at the We Are Libertarians Network. You can find On the Run with Remso W. Martinez on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play. You know how the internet works. Come on down and let's discover how to achieve real freedom in your life together.
Hey everybody, I just want to take this time to give a big shout out to the very first sponsor of the Break the Bell podcast. That is Goulash Media. They can be found at goulashmedia.net. Goulash Media specializes in graphic design, web design, audio recordings, video work, wedding videos, music videos, even political campaign videos. Goulash Media caters to the little guy with the big vision. You can check them out at goulashmedia.net. That's GOULASH media.net.
You've got too much on your mind to be so conscious and not just believing every sorry going away. And it's about time we address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect. Reputation destroyed by what you can expect to be. In between, because I know you can handle it. To face the truth of the matter, it's still so much better to leave the light and drag it to your grave. Because you see what to make of this, how you can turn your own tables and work this, and take advantage of your failure like you play to anyway. And it's about time we address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect. Reputation destroyed by what you can expect to be. The faceless in between. You're still alive, but you've been dead inside for a long time. And I understand why, but you did this to yourself. You did this to them. You don't even remember the name. Why should anybody remember you? Why should anyone give you another shot? You know the wrong. You know you deserve to be forgotten. Now you're everything you always despise. You know you should feel through all this lies. All this effort to cover up what you've done. We already know. We already see. Wake up and be better before you get to that far. We address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect. Reputation destroyed by what you can expect to be. The faceless in between. Time for you. You've got too much on your mind to be so conscious and not just believing every sorry going away. And it's about time we address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect. Reputation destroyed by what you can expect to be. The faceless in between. Because I know you can handle it. To face the truth of the matter, it's still so much better to leave the light than drag it to your grave. Because you see what to make of this. How you can turn your own tables and work this. And take advantage of your failure like you planned to anyway. And it's about time we address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect. Reputation destroyed by what you can expect to be. The faceless in between. You're still alive, but you've been dead inside for a long time. And I understand why, but you did this to yourself. You did this to me. You don't even remember the name. Why should anybody remember you? Why should anyone give you another shot? You know the wrong. You know you deserve to be forgotten. Now you're everything you always disguised. You always get guilt for all the innocent lies. All this effort to cover up what you've done. We already know. We already fixed. Wake up and be better before you get some downside. We address the situation and begin to get back to you. We hold a candle like vigil for your self-respect.
All right, we are back, and I'm waiting for Jose. There he is. All right, let me kill the music. Jose, I wasn't sure if you were back.
Oh, you're good.
So we're here. We're back with Jose of the No Way Jose podcast, and we're talking about mistrust in the government, anti-government sentiment, downright hate of the government, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
At this point, do you think some of the hate for the government is unfounded? Can we consider that unfounded, or you think it's rightfully so at this point, based on the stuff we've talked about?
I mean, I'm sure there are some aspects that are unfounded, but in the large majority, it's completely founded. Fuck them.
Do you think? I'm going to get into a quote later by Bill Clinton, but do you think hate for the government is anti-patriotic?
No, not at all. Well, I guess it depends on your definition, because I don't know. I've seen people describe it really is completely just how you define things. So if you define patriotism as as that, then yeah, sure. But I don't know. I guess it depends on what you mean. It's kind of vague.
I feel like if you love your country the way like it was founded on, and if you love it, you should hate a government that stands for all the things that you don't stand for. I don't see an issue. Maybe not hate it, but you should at least push back against a government that. Well, I mean, we're supposed to be a representative democracy, and if a government's doing things that you don't feel is representing your best interest, yeah, you should push back against it. Maybe not with violence, but I don't know to what extent you at what point you think violence becomes necessary towards a quote unquote oppressive government, but I'm sure there's got to be a point there somewhere.
I feel like, yeah, I mean, if you look at the basis of the country, then yeah, it's our job to hold the country accountable. And to be honest, when you look at the state of the country, we haven't done a good enough job holding them accountable.
Sure. What do you think, Jose?
On the, I guess I wanted to touch on the violence aspect you brought up. I would say the only time I think that violence is pragmatic against the U.S. government is if you, or the government in general, is if you're somehow in a strategic place to where that could actually provide any basically it's never, for the most part, it's never going to happen unless you've completely set up a completely parallel market. You guys are, this is kind of one of the theories of like agorism that I've talked about. Like, but for the most part, unless you're like got a damn near bulletproof, like black market / like a parallel market and everything good to go, you've already got your communities. For the most part, any sort of violence against the government is going to go 100% against your fucking things. Like, I don't necessarily, I mean, obviously it depends. There's a lot of nuance to this. It depends on what you're doing. Are there any instances involved? I'm not morally against it. I just think pragmatically it's mostly retarded. It's the example I always use is like, I'm an anarchist. So like, if a cop pulls you over and it's for some bullshit, like you weren't like just stabbing someone or some shit, I think they are aggressing against you if they like try to fine you or pull you out of your car or whatever. So I think morally you're probably in the clear to defend yourself and do what you need to do. I think you're kind of an idiot if you do, though. And that's kind of how I look at a lot of these. This is the thing like with like the Boogs, where they were like, pushing for some sort of boogaloo. And I'm like, or like in a genuine fashion. Like, I like the memes. They're funny. But like any sort, I know a lot of people are all about 1776 and shit. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're just going to install another government that's probably worse. I'm not even entirely convinced ours was necessarily that much better in a sense. I don't know. That's one I go back and forth on because I mean, they just implemented a different government and then it, I don't know how much longer it took. I mean, almost immediately, what was it? The Whiskey Rebellion. They already were betraying their principles like almost immediately. Right. I don't know how long it took before the taxes were higher than they were before. So, I mean, maybe for a short period of time it was better, but then over the long period of time, I think you could definitely make a very strong case that they were better off under England. So I don't know. My point being is I think, pretty much political violence is almost 99.999% of the time is stupid, like really just dumb. I may morally agree with you, but I'd be like, and maybe like, well, that was kind of awesome, but it's also really dumb. It's kind of like when you're like a teenager and you do some really dumb shit and you're like, that was really fucking cool. Yeah, it was cool, but it was still dumb.
Right. and then ultimately pointless. And you bring a good point, because when we had talked about this a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, that the United States is too big to fail. So even if it, people did rise up, I feel like other countries would sweep in and make sure it didn't happen because they need to keep the United States in place.
Yeah, I agree. My mind on that topic leans more towards, instead of like rising up against the government, just pull back and be more like, that's why we always say be more self-sustaining. Like get out from under the government's freaking wing and kind of do your own thing, form your own communities or whatever. But then we see classic examples where that's exactly what they're doing. Like Randy Weaver, like the Branch Davidians, they were just trying to do it on their own, just be away from the elements of government, and the government came in and just killed them all. So what do you do then? It's just like, well, I just want to go live by my fucking self. It's just like, well, we're going to come kill you. So so then what?
Unless you set up like a Chad, right? Government didn't fuck with them.
I mean, people always bring up like Waco and Ruby Ridge as examples of like kind of against that sort of mentality. And it's like, obviously, like, these are distinct scenarios. These are a little bit different, and they're always going to be people that, like, say you're setting up your own communities, kind of being self-sustaining. Yeah, every now and then someone might get busted or screwed over, say they're, skirting taxes in one way or another or whatever, but it's not necessarily an argument against on the whole. Yeah, they're always going to be, my argument usually be like, well, you probably didn't properly weigh your risk to reward ratio there, or whatever, so, I mean, there's always going to be, but on the other flip side, it's like, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is just keep going along, like, and I honestly think it's probably a more rewarding life if you get to a point to where you're more self-sustaining and stuff like that. So, go ahead.
I wasn't saying that to convince people to not go that route. I was just saying, well, we see classic examples where they don't allow that, and in my opinion, those are the cases where I think it's if a government is coming down on when all you're trying to do is be away, then you have a right to defend yourself, in my opinion. I feel like the Branch Davidians, according to things I've read, they had every right to shoot back. I feel like Randy Weaver, his family, they had every right to shoot back. I'm not saying like, hey, let's go storm the Capitol or anything like that, but I'm saying if it comes down to it and it's your family or having patriotism towards this government, I'm going to choose my family every fucking time, and I'll fight to the death for it.
Yeah, 100%.
So anyway, did you have anything else? I kind of interrupted you.
No, I had another thought, but I think I forgot it already.
All right. Well,
I just had a thought.
Go ahead.
That okay, so the OKC bombing, that was April 95, right?
Mm-hmm.
So didn't the OJ Simpson trial like kick in full force like a month after that?
I'm not sure
like,
when that happened.
Kind of totally monopolized the airwaves after
took away from
all
the
the
narrative.
coverage of it. Yeah.
Huh.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Didn't even look into that part. But we kind of touched a little on Waco. I had this clip here I wanted to play really fast just to kind of get a little bit of what was going on in the people's heads during Waco.
Looks like a JCPenney's Christmas head.
It is.
With around 80 people still inside Mount Carmel, the FBI decided to force an end to the siege by driving everybody out with military-grade tear gas. On April 19th, on the 51st day of the siege, the tear gassing began.
This is not an assault. We are not entering the building.
The Davidians had gas masks, but of course the FBI knew that there are no gas masks for children.
Everybody grab your mask. Everybody grab your mask.
After 6 hours of intense tear gassing, smoke was spotted in a second-story window. Within minutes, the whole building was ablaze.
And everything in there just went pitch black.
Control of this.
So I don't know what side, what narrative everybody follows. Like the Branch Davidian started the fire. They were on a suicide mission from God, or the government started a fire intentionally or unintentionally by spraying this gas into the building. I don't fucking care. Like I mentioned before, they had every opportunity to arrest David Koresh or whoever out in the streets, and they chose this as a spectacle, and then they used military tactics, and then they used CS gas, which is outlawed for use in foreign wars, on their own people, knowing that like 26 children that were still in there did not have the possession of effective gas masks. So even if a fire didn't break out, how do you justify what you did there?
I mean, I don't know. Pretty hard to justify, honestly. I have a hard time. I know a lot of people use a post hoc rationalization of the supposed, and I don't know how much truth there is to it. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying it is true. The aspect of that kids were being molested there or some shit. I mean, I remember I've gone on dives on that before, and it doesn't seem to be that well founded, but I mean, there is something to it, I believe, if I recall. But I guess CPS went there a whole shitload of times and never found anything to corroborate it. Although, to be fair, what is CPS really ever going to turn up in something like that?
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to justify it aside from just like, hey, you were supposed to do what we told you to do and you didn't do it, so we're going to keep going.
That fucking Chipman, who was going for ATF, didn't he say that they had like 50 caliber machine guns? They opened fire on federal helicopters and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case.
Right.
I think they might have popped a couple shots up at the helicopters, but
Right.
Either way,
Yeah.
like the whole thing was started supposedly under the premise that they're endangering children. So let's spray CS gas into this facility
For the sake of the children.
For the sake of the children. It's kind of like back what I was saying about Randy Weaver. It's like, what was he hurting, and how did you hurt them so much more than like, it's like, hey, there's this problem and they could be hurting people, so let's go hurt them so much harder.
Right.
And then they wonder why there's this movement of mistrust in the government and then this is so publicized too. I mean, the compound burned down on live television.
Oh yeah.
We watched 86 people burn to death at the hands of our government.
Right.
So whoever's fault it was, I don't even fucking care.
Oh no,
It's like,
right? No, I know.
you don't bounce back from that too easily.
Right.
No, for sure. I mean, I definitely lean towards that. It was the government that started the fire. But even if they didn't start the fire, it's like they kind of, they created this whole situation to where, I mean, I don't know. I guess, I mean, the idea that this was going to go down well was pretty stupid. I don't. It's really hard to defend Waco in any way, shape, or form, honestly. But
And I mean, I think everybody's familiar with the Waco story. We don't have to dig too deep into it.
Right.
There was the whole Waco miniseries that came out a couple of years ago, and I was actually surprised. I mean, they didn't really lean towards either side, which I was kind of surprised it didn't lead more towards like the pro-government side of it, because any mainstream article you read, it's like, well, there's documented proof that they were saying start the fires or pour the gasoline and stuff. It's like, yeah, but who documented that? That the FBI agents that were complicit in all of this?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and the evidence they point to. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The evidence they pointed to from what I recall, was extremely dubious. It was like out of context stuff that can be interpreted multiple ways. It was definitely not a smoking gun of they were like, let's set this place on fire. Like it was
right.
I don't remember the details, but I do remember hearing that and people saying that, and it's dubious at best. So
well, even if David Koresh is 100% responsible for what happened there was full front page articles of his belief system that this oppressive government was going to come in and they were going to basically destroy them all. And so when the federal government is coming in with full force of the military, the way he was, all you did was reassure his ideology, his crazy thoughts in his head. All you did was make that a realization to him and possibly push him to this point where he would have done something. If that was his goal, that, hey, we're going to be martyrs for this, you just set the stage for his mentality.
Yeah, you're just proving him right. It's the same thing, the Duncan Lemp thing. I guess one thing the cops focused a lot on that case was the fact that, I guess on his door, he set up like kind of like a dummy shotgun, like tripwire type thing or something along those lines. Not to hurt, it wouldn't hurt anyone. It would just kind of make a loud noise and alert you.
Yes.
And that was one thing they pointed to a lot. And by the way, I got confirmation of that because that was one aspect of the case that was kind of gray. But I got confirmation from that from Jessica. Oh, fuck, I forgot her name. But Duncan's girlfriend. And yeah, that was a thing. But anyways, point being is it's like they try to point to you like, look at him. He was so concerned about this. And it's like, yeah, well, you just proved him right. I think you didn't go far enough. So.
Yeah, that's just like saying somebody that puts an alarm system in their house, they're just fucking paranoid that somebody's going to come kill them. Yeah, that is literally why you put an alarm system in your house.
Yeah. But it also goes to the mentality of the people not worried about the Patriot Act. Well, if they weren't doing anything wrong, why would they have to worry about it?
Right. And that's kind of it's weird, the mentality we shifted to from that 90s, like the government's going to come get us, to I don't know if it's because of 9/11, and we shifted now our focus from the big bad government to the big bad brown people in Iraq and Afghanistan. But yeah, the mentality was, well, what's the government going to do wrong if you're not doing anything wrong? It's like, how did we get from that sentiment of the 90s to that, hey, let's glom onto the Patriot Act of the 2000s?
I mean, probably just obviously 9/11. I mean, this is what happens when a major thing happens.
Yeah.
I think people, while there was diminished faith in the government, it was still enough to kind of like where, one big event, it swings it back, which, this is kind of the thing I keep bringing about. This is one thing Richard Booth brought up as well, is I do think we are genuinely in I know it sounds like a kooky conspiracy, but I think there's a genuine concern that there could be some sort of false flag or something along those lines, or maybe even a genuine thing that will completely gin up, energy to the establishment's favor, or at least they'll try. And the hope here is that enough people start to see how these guys operate and realize that, like, hey, maybe don't just jump on every story right away. Like even 9/11, like I've never done like too many deep dives, but I know at the very least there's a lot of weird connections with Saudis and a lot of our guys, covering up shit. So it like if you just don't go knee jerk reaction, like, oh my God, the fucking terrorists,
Right.
like you can start to see a little bit clearer. Like, fuck, we went after Iraq because I think they made some weird convoluted financial case, which that he somehow backed fucking Bin Laden. It was nonsense.
Somehow tied it in. We still to this day don't know why, but somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure there was plenty of people that thought that the terrorists from 9/11 were hiding out in Iraq at that point, just the way the media operated. I'm sure I'm guilty of it too. It's like, yeah, fucking go to Iraq and kill the terrorists too. It's just like that was the propaganda that was being peddled at the time.
Yeah. Well, it was Bush's whole, well, if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yeah.
Right. So you looked over Saddam Hussein and kind of pointed his finger and was like, what'd you say? What did you say?
Right. Exactly. So what you were saying about what your guest, I can't think of his name again, Booth, was, yeah. And what he was saying about looking at today, when I was listening to the early episodes and kind of the government response leading up to the OKC bombing, when I was listening to the episode, I literally said out loud, oh, fuck, they're going to do it again. Because just the parallels between the sentiment of the government, like kind of pushing this whole domestic terrorist narrative leading up to OKC, it just lined up so perfectly with what we're seeing today within the last couple of years since January 6th with this whole push against domestic terrorism. I'm like, they're going to do it again. And within like 2 episodes, I think he came out and he was like, I want to put it past him to do it again. I was like, shit, just prove my point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm definitely something I'm concerned about for sure. It is like, I do think, I mean, maybe most people, I don't know how your audience is, but most people who pay attention probably noticed about a year or two ago, there'd be little dribbles of like in the mainstream media of like articles of like, or even I think there were some of the, like, I don't know if it's Congress or Senate or what. There were a few major figures that were going around saying like, oh, the next big threat is domestic terrorism. Obviously, they'd always attach that white supremacist label to it as well. Yeah. But, and like, that's the big issue. And it's like anyone who actually pays attention in a genuine way and has a good good finger on the pulse type deal, they know that that's not a genuine, the idea that white supremacy is running rampant in the United States in modern day is just silly. I can't take anyone serious who says it. Like,
right.
I mean, are there white supremacists? Sure. Like, are there militia movements that have white supremacists? Sure, probably. But the idea it's some sort of, actual legitimate threat of like white supremacist groups or even Christian nationalists, which I know some people make that case, it's just silly. Like, I can't take it seriously, especially when you kind of like have a beat on like what the militia movements kind of look like now. It's probably a lot of generic right wingers and then a lot of the boog types right now, probably.
Yeah.
So,
well, I got this article here from 1995, May 4th, 1995. So this was just after the OKC bombing, and there's so many parallels. It almost sounds like it could be written like post January 6th. So I wanted to read a little bit from this. This is titled "The Militias, Guns and Bitter."
It's not even good. I gotta say that. It's just a shitty title.
Yes.
I thought it was gonna be like a good pun. Like, no, it's just dumb.
Nope, not at all. Nothing. So it says, as the ominous crime bill made its way through Congress last summer, a sense of foreboding swept through the ranks of the Florida Patriot Network. I mean, just picture 2022 as the date on this instead of 1995. Says, one of the dozens of paramilitary citizen groups formed over the past 2 years in many states. Convinced the bill was another infringement on the right to bear arms, the self-styled militias broke into small units called triads to better prepare for a possible confrontation. Fueled by an intense hatred of federal law enforcement, the group's most extreme members went even further. Some wanted to more or less go into becoming survivalists, a head for the hills type organization. I guess you could say some people decided to go underground. They've had enough, explained leader John Adams, who heads a small splinter group that meets in a private hall in Stuart, Florida.
Is his name really John Adams?
I mean, you got to be the head of a patriot movement if your name is John Adams. I think it's your birthright. Adams' members of his cell are still trying to work within the political system, although their disillusionment is profound. So scrolling down, because they get into the Oklahoma City bombing, because it says the militia movement is under intense scrutiny in the wake of the Oklahoma City federal building bombing, an act motivated at least in part by anti-government fervor, authorities believe. With suspect Timothy James McVeigh linked to extremist militias in Michigan and Arizona, the groups suddenly are no longer seen as largely harmless, weekend warriors donned in camouflage and battle fatigues. And that's kind of, I feel, what most people, like you basically described that as the boog movement today, is like most people just see them as like LARPers running around in fatigues carrying AR-15s.
Yeah.
Not take them serious, but it's going to take, like, I feel like the government needs an event like the Oklahoma City bombing for people to take that seriously.
Yeah.
And that's why it scares the shit out of me.
And that's, yeah, because they were trying to do that with January 6th, right? I mean, tried to make it real scary, tried to take over the Capitol building, AOC crying in her bathroom, you know, whatever.
Right.
And it just didn't pan out that way. You know, the whole trial this summer they thought was going to be the biggest blockbuster since Top Gun 2.
Yeah.
And nobody cared. And so, yeah, they need something else to make that threat real to them. And they're due.
I think he brought up a good point there with the January 6th. My hope is because it does kind of seem like, if you're just going to read the tea leaves of what the elites are doing, is they were kind of trying to make January 6th in a certain sense, maybe they're OKC essentially, where like, yeah, maybe they were like, yeah, we won't go as hard because, you know, they're not really willing to commit, you know, being safe kind of deal. And they're like, well, we'll just do this. And like, we can gin up, and it didn't work. And if anything, it made their problem worse. And the only thing I can hope is, you know, and I think there is some genuine truth to the aspect of why they, you know, if we're going to, you know, make a lot of conjecture here, why they did January 6th and not an OKC right off the bat. It's because in this modern day, they kind of can't get away with it as well as they could in the past. You know, it's a lot harder. There's so much more moving stuff going on. You know, they have to be just blatantly shuffle things under the rug to alert too many people. I definitely think, you know, there's something to that. And even then with January 6th, a lot of stuff started coming out and you're like, come on, you're fucking with me. Right. And my only hope is if they do some sort of OKC, it will be like right off the bat. You know, I mean, we have like people like me and you, and then Richard Booth and a lot of other people are already kind of pointing out like, hey, I wouldn't be at least be surprised if something pops off. So if something pops off, it's kind of like, I mean, at the very least, I mean, obviously I don't want anything to happen. I don't want any, you know, innocent people to get hurt. You know, to be clear, if the mirror building only got ATF fucking people, I wouldn't be as enraged about it. You know, I still would think it was dumb. But the fact they took out kids made it, you know, abhorrent. And obviously I'm sure there were a lot of, you know, civilian people there. They're just, you know, I don't know, probably some little grandma working a part-time job as a, you know, receptionist. It's kind of hard to bill her and be like, you know, put her on the same level as like a through and through ATF agent. But
sure.
You know, there. You know, so point being is, yeah, I hope if there's something like this does happen, that, you know, people, you know, kind of like right off the bat are like, you know, fuck you, get out of here. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of things might come to light real quick. But I don't know if you guys saw that Anne Hesh thing, which I haven't really done a deep dive in that yet. There's a lot of weird shit right off the bat. They're like, what the fuck? And so I'm hoping that, like, if something like OKC happens, especially when you're dealing with so many moving parts, so you to set up an op like this, there'll be, you know, hopefully just like a myriad of like people like, look at this bullshit, look at this bullshit, look at this bullshit, and it's, you know, it'll glow right off the bat.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to do episodes like this where we like take a look at the past, because we can make so much parallelism. I mean, like I said, reading this article, you can put the date 2022 on it and see how the government mindset works and see how the narrative works. And it's like the exact same narrative that they were pushing back then, they're pushing today. This goes on to say, with President Clinton pushing for stepped up law enforcement authority against domestic terrorism, fallout from the OKC bombing has begun to shake the militia movement.
And you brought up a good point, Craig. Government doesn't change their strategies, right?
Yes, right.
I mean, they keep doing the same stuff over and over again, and they just hope to distract you with other stuff so you're not paying attention. But I mean, they've been doing the same shit for the last 50 years,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's so if you notice the patterns, you can kind of try to pick up, and that's why, yeah, like you said, I mean, another OKC seems evident with when you follow the patterns and the cycles.
Mhm. So the one sentence I wanted to read, I alluded to earlier, was it says President Clinton this week escalated his criticism of paramilitary groups that espouse violence. He said, "We must also stand up against people who say, 'I love my country, but I hate my government.'" So that's what I was getting to earlier on, where I'm like, is it really unpatriotic to say I love my country, but I hate my government? I
Mhm.
mean, we see all these examples of why to fucking hate this government. And then even if a lot of these situations were exactly by the mainstream narrative, like the OKC bombing or Waco or Ruby Ridge, even if the people were 100% at fault, the fact that there's so much cover up and it's hard to find, like, get a straight story out of the people that are supposedly giving the true story, it's like, we've said all the time, it's like, you'd do yourself a favor in the eyes of conspiracy theorists if you would just come out and be open with shit instead of
Right.
covering up so
Right.
much shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much to say on that. I agree.
But I feel like that's part of the strategy in itself, you know?
Yeah.
Keep the confusion.
Well, I feel like they don't want to necessarily tone down the violence because they need that kind of the bad guy or something. You know, they need a little bit of discontent so they can build up their base, or they can build up their narrative. They need somebody that's pushing against that so they can win elections. Be like, well,
Absolutely.
you don't want to be a white supremacist, do you? Or you don't want to be Antifa, or, you know, there's really no push to tone down the discontent with our government. It's more like, well, they're just stupid and white supremacists, or they're just terrorists. There's no like trying to build back the trust in the government, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely not. I think, I mean, it like they kind of pulled it off with OKC. I think we're getting to a time, and I'm kind of repeating myself here, that where it's getting harder and harder for them to pull this off. You know, so I mean, I guess I am hopeful for the future. Although, I mean, I'm literally on here saying I think, you know, another something similar to an OKC event is inevitable. But I also think the fallout from it will probably not be the same, or what they're looking for. I think, you know, they are, you know, like you guys are pointing out, repeating strategies. Their playbook kind of stays the same. I mean, to some extent, like I was kind of implying, I think if we're going to kind of play, you know, if we're going to conjecture here, I think, you know, there's maybe a chance they went with a January 6th narrative, hoping that would actually work, and it didn't. So I do think they are to some extent mindful of their pitfalls, but I don't think enough. I think it's just going to keep backfiring. I think if this does happen again, I mean, it depends. I could be wrong, could eat my words. Maybe I'm a little more hopeful than I should be, but I really don't think we're going to get this, like, you know, people really completely buying back into the narrative if something like this happens. I really think, and unless they pull off the perfect op or some shit and, like, you know, no holes in it whatsoever, which in a certain sense, they almost have more capabilities to do stuff like that now. But at the same point, not really. It's kind of this idea of centralized power versus decentralized power. Like, yeah, they may have more, you know, they can do deep fakes and stuff like that, but we have, like, you know, 1 million autists just looking for shit. So, and it's only that power is only growing. So, yeah, maybe individually they aren't as powerful, but, you know, as a group, you know, that are like not operating, you know, cohesively in some sort of centralized manner, yeah, it's going to fuck them. So, you know.
Well, and I feel like they almost got everybody pulled together when COVID kicked off.
I was just going to bring up COVID
because
and how that
because
applies.
when it first started off, I mean, I was like, oh shit, you know, and you know, I would come home from work and take off my work clothes, throw it in the washer, you know, just was super careful and everything, and until all of a sudden holes started showing up in the narrative, and then it started like, what the fuck, you know. But I remember people putting signs up on their windows like, we're all in this together and stuff that, you know. And so
they almost had a 9/11 moment there where we all came together as a country. But I feel like speaking of, I guess, mistrust in the government or anti-government sentiment, I feel like COVID produced more of that than even 9/11. Well, 9/11 brought it up, but even like Waco or Ruby Ridge, I think COVID kind of made that more of a mainstream mistrust in the government overall.
Yeah, they overplayed their hands so fucking hard there, like so hard, like. And it's I don't know if it's like the contrast because like I mean I'm like an anarchist, like I'm not a big fan of government, like, but when this COVID thing came, like, don't get me wrong, I was very like I was skeptical, but I also was like, well, I'm going to operate, as if it's worst case scenario. I still never advocated whatsoever for shutdowns because I knew all the theoretical implications of that. But even then, still, I was like, when it first started kicking off, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get way back in shape and start eating better because I knew like, hey, I probably should be in better physical shape because I had no idea. At that point, all we really had was all the crazy videos from China and shit. And I'm like, I don't know how much this is bullshit, how much is real. So it's like, I might as well act like it could be. And I knew, the best thing to do probably is to get in shape, eat better. I definitely, I'm not a super social guy. So I'm not like a guy who goes to large gatherings. So that wasn't an issue. I mean, you still got to work. You still got to do your shit. I got to pay the bills. But yeah, so I think a lot of people, even people of our ilk, bought into it in that aspect. I mean, not bought into it might not be the right way to put it. They're still like, okay, because they kind of gave you like a sort of plausible narrative.
Right.
And they hadn't really fucked us over super hard in a while. So we're like, okay, whatever. I mean, they had, but you know what I mean? Not in this grand type of way.
Yes.
Like it's like we're on a different level now. Like, yeah, we have COVID, we have January 6th. Like it is like, and if there is this perspective, like, okay, see, these are differing levels in the shit we had experienced before. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are other landmark events like OKC before, but I don't think we had the sort of consciousness like we do now to where we're really seeing it for what it is. So, yeah, I do think that they definitely overplay their hand. That's going to probably, backfire. I think maybe that's a lot of what this is trying to I don't know, grasp at straws to kind of pull their shit together. I think their shit's unraveling.
Absolutely.
I don't know how this presents itself at all. It's not like I think the federal government's going to disappear anytime soon. But I don't know. For the next decade, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing secession movements. We start seeing certain states start kind of flouting the federal government, doing whatever the hell they want. I don't know, maybe more militia movements, or like. I don't know, more people, more parallel economy type stuff sprouting up. But I think we're also going to see with more of that, I do think we'll see the inverse. Because I think, we always see this Agenda 2030 shit and whatever. I think in a certain sense, they're going to win in the short term, in a certain sense, depending on how you define win. Because I know everyone's seen that, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy. If anyone's read that article, they point out that they point out this like fantasy, utopia to anyone who's has any sort of grasp on, libertarian theory. There, it's the opposite of utopia, but how they were trying to present it was like utopia, like, oh, everyone will all get along, and whatever you need, you'll just you'll get it, but you don't own anything or whatever. But they even pointed out in that article, like, well, there'll be, in this scenario, there are obviously going to be these people who didn't quite buy into this, and they'll be living on the outskirts. And obviously, they described them in very disparaging terms. But I do think that is actually likely what our future will look like. I think we will probably have something like, smart cities or whatever, where people have all these like fancy amenities, but then are fucking but they're it's super authoritarian in a sense, kind of like high tech North Korea is maybe not completely there, but. And I think on the outskirts, you'll see more rural type lifestyles of people. I do think they'll still have technology and stuff. I'm not saying they'll live in the dark ages, but I think that's likely to be kind of what we'll see in the future. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing as long as you're on the right side of the divide. So I think more people on our side of the divide will make it better. So, do
you think those people on the outside are going to be deemed as some sort of domestic terrorist type? Do you think that hardcore with it?
I mean, maybe not. I think it more be, if I had to guess, it'd be kind of more of the same condescending language as the coastal elites kind of use for middle America already. Maybe to a further extent. I don't know if
or anti-maskers or anti-vaxxers, the way they portray us.
We'll just probably characterize them as like dumb hicks or whatever, in their backwards ways. And it's like, okay, have fun with that. Just it's kind of similar today. I mean, I think COVID opened a lot of people's eyes of like, I mean, I'm not holding it against anyone who lives in a city type lifestyle, but I don't know. It sounds like a fucking nightmare to me now.
Right.
I live in the country. I have a couple acres, and I mean, I don't think I'm all country, but I can't imagine having like an apartment with my family in the fucking middle of the city or some shit. That'd be a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend of mine just a year ago in New York on vacation, so that they were quarantined, just being in town there. They had to stay in their hotel room and stuff. And so, I mean, it's like, yeah, it just sounds like a nightmare being in a city still.
So to kind of wrap up the 90s, take it back for a second. Do you think we were on the cusp of something, some sort of change, or do you think it was just all hyped up?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I don't really know. That's like one I'd have to think on a little bit. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I really can't give you a good answer to that one. I can't even like pull shit out of my ass. It's kind of hard to say. I mean, I definitely think there was like maybe, but like not enough. Like, because obviously they were able to sway things by just making some major event. Where I guess you could make a case that the consciousness of the nation wasn't elevated enough to really, or whatever, line of thinking you want to use to apply to it. But like, it seems to be they were still susceptible to falling into it. But it definitely seemed to be there was kind of a rising awareness of like, whoa, this is some bullshit. So I don't know. I think it's always slowly a losing battle for them, but it kind of ebbs and flows. It's kind of the eternal, what is it, Oppenheimer said it's like the predator class and the productive class or something like that. So it's like this constant battle against the two, and I think over time the productive class will win. Yeah, but it's going to take a while.
So to wrap this up, I've got this video that just came out yesterday from CNN, and it just applied so well because they're applying anti-government sentiment to the pushback against the Inflation Reduction Act and the buildup of the IRS. And I want you to hear how condescending this dude is from CNN. So let's watch this real quick.
In their words, I know it got short shrift this week. The House passing that historic climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. One of the components of the bill is a lot more funding for the IRS to hire tens of thousands of more IRS agents in order to try to make sure people are paying how much they're supposed to pay. What was that called on the right? It was called a terrifying overreach by the government. The reason I'm bringing it up is let's just call it what it is. MAGA media's hatred of government is reaching a new high. When you have a combination of these FBI stories and the IRS getting a lot more funding, this is a new peak in terms of that anti-government sentiment. So it's no wonder that there's concern inside government about security and about threats.
Yeah, and I mean, the right's always advocated for small government, but in this case, I think particularly when you're talking about the FBI, it's not necessarily pro-small government approach taking. They just want to defund the whole thing and abolish it because it's probing a political figure that they happen to support. And I think what you have to point out repeatedly, and I know we have, is that when the FBI was investigating Hillary Clinton, they were very supportive of the FBI.
So what do you think of that?
I think I agree with everything he said, just maybe for the opposite reasons they do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know if it's a Freudian slip, but do you notice how when he said the Inflation Reduction Act, he put air quotes on it. He's like, the Inflation Reduction Act, like, we all know it's not going to like reduce inflation. And he's supposedly siding with all these bills. He's like, this historic bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's like, do you think that was a Freudian slip that he knows? He secretly knows, but he doesn't know?
Right.
I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd necessarily apply too much thinking of that.
Yeah.
I mean, but maybe not.
Maybe he just really likes using air quotes.
Yes. Maybe he just misuses air quotes.
Right.
Like Donald Trump uses his accordion hands too much. But the part that got to me was he's like praising this buildup of the IRS by adding like 80,000 members. He's like, yeah, all we're doing is just going to try to make sure people are paying their fair share of taxes. And the right obviously conflates this and pushes this whole anti-government conspiracy. And it's like, I don't know of any way this could turn out good when the IRS is on their job description saying you have to have the mindset that you could use deadly force if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Execute
for sure.
warrants and do arrests.
Yes.
I mean, they just became the largest federal police force.
Yeah.
Right. And not to kick this can down, but when you look at the WEF's plan to take away private property and make you happy about it, if you want to take away someone's private property, what's the best way to do it? You're not paying your taxes on it. We got to take your house.
Yeah.
Just remember, kids, it's always moral. Just maybe not smart.
So to wrap this up, where do you think we are with anti-government sentiment today? I know you basically had a dire prediction that, hey, we're probably going to lose in the short term in this, but do you think more people are? Do you think people are actually rising up to where they may do something, or do you think it's mostly just like social media swinging dicks around?
Well, okay. I guess there's a couple of things there. With the do something, I think. I guess it depends. I think what the problem is, too many people, and this is kind of a problem with statism as well as it is with libertarianism, is this do something. It's kind of like every time there's a gun thing, or like a mashing, we have to do something. And I think a lot of the same thing happens with all like libertarian circles. We want to do something, and ironically, it typically ends up being political action. I mean, I'm not trying to have an argument with that. I mean, sure, maybe there's some merits to political action, but I think, like you kind of were getting at earlier, the best thing you could do is start setting up your life to be more independent. Obviously, weighing the risks to the benefits. I'm not saying immediately stop paying all taxes, but maybe look into ways that you could shuffle things around or whatever, or what have you. The more money you're keeping, the better. Create multiple fucking revenue streams. Start I don't know, try to interact locally with people if you can. A whole myriad of things. Which is essentially just creating a counter market or a parallel market or what have you, because I think that's really the only true way to win in the long run, or to have a better. And that's and the other thing I want to touch on is you said, oh, we'll lose. I actually, to be fair, I mean, I'm not like trying to shit on you or anything, but I said I said the global World Economic Forum or whatever is, I think they will win, at least in the short term, but I also think we'll win. If you're on the right side of the thing. And a lot of people talk about this white pill, black pill bullshit. I'm not a big fan of that, because it's a matter of like, okay, it depends on what you're doing, really. I mean, yeah, not everyone's going to make it, but I think some people will do well. And the future I kind of, sort of imagined or whatever, where we have the people living in the outskirts, I actually think they'll probably have more rewarding, fulfilling, and just better lives in general than the people living inside, living in the pod or whatever. So yeah, it's like, yeah, cool. You won't have these fancy, some of the fancy amenities, but is that really what life's all about? I don't think so. I think a lot of people would prefer having slightly more outdated technology, or maybe not as much amenities. Oh, cool. I have a pool that's, a quarter of a mile down the road or whatever, or as opposed to, I think a lot of people prefer to be like, well, I'd rather have my 2 to 10 acres where I don't have to deal, or, I have my own little slice of paradise. I think a lot of people would prefer that. So I think we're both going to win. And I think the elites will lose in the long, long run. So,
well, you mentioned like maybe we'll be slightly less up to date in technology, or whatever you were saying. It takes me back to like the Amish people. It's like they're what we would consider way behind the technology, but do you think they're living miserable lives doing what they're doing? I mean, maybe some of them, sure, but I feel like they're more free than any of us are.
Well, I've argued with my wife a million times about maybe we should consider even her being like, kind of like, I don't know. I need to figure out a way to get into the Amish community. I'd be for it. I think that sounds awesome, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
You had brought up a while ago on one of our shows that it sounded like feudalism.
Yeah.
And I mean and to me, I guess that's where it takes me, is like, you're not supposed to be hunting on this land. You're not supposed to be fishing on this land, So I think that crack down even more so on the people outside the city to discourage that kind of living.
Yeah. I don't know. It could go anyway, really. Right. So I guess we'll find out when we get there. But I like where the direction you're going. Like the best form of, I guess, anti-government sentiment would be just getting out from under the umbrella of the government and being more self-reliable. Because I mean, even if at the end of the day they do crack down on it, at least you gave it a fair shot.
Oh no,
I mean,
absolutely.
you have a better shot
Right.
of that than taking up arms against the federal government.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
To touch a little bit, I guess the kind of point again with the do something thing is people think do something and they think I don't know, some sort of political action or some shit. Whereas like and a lot of people, you know, kind of have this like flip in their head where I'm like, hey, you know, kind of maybe set your life up better. And like they don't see that as do something, where if anything, that's more of a do something than the other thing. And it's also more of like an actual, you know, have a positive effect in your life. And I think that kind of spreads out. Yeah, I mean, you're actually doing something that actually requires more effort too. I mean, it really does. Because, you know, it's a lot easier to be like, well, I'll sign this position or sign this petition, or I'll advocate for this, you know, one political candidate or whatever, or I'll go hoorah when they fucking, you know, talk about banning guns or whatever the thing is, you know. But, you know, it's a lot harder to actually do something.
Right. I think that's a good spot to wrap this up. That's a good point that we're talking about here of ending this anti-government show, I guess.
It's a happy way to end it.
It is. We typically don't end on a positive note. So, Jose, let us know where people can find you, your podcast, anything more about you, what you're doing.
You can find me on YouTube, all the major auto podcatchers, and Odyssey as well. The name of the show is No Way Jose. If you follow me on social media, I'm at Senor Jose 2020 right now. It's like my third account, maybe even fourth. I don't know. I've gone over 3K multiple times. They keep nuking me. But then if you want to, you know, if you want to have something to back up in case I get nuked, you can follow me on Facebook. I'm Jose Galison. Also my show, No Way Jose. I have a page for that as well. But I mean, I don't really do anything on Facebook, but if you want to, like, you know, hit me up on Messenger or whatever, or be able to, you know, maintain contact in case I get nuked as opposed to Twitter, that's where you can do it at. But yeah, that's all I got.
All right.
Nice.
Well, Jose, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I think this was a pretty interesting conversation. You even said on the break, you're like, I'm thinking of things that I never thought of before. And I was like, well, that was kind of the point of this show, was to just kind of talk through this time period and talk through how it relates to today. And I think we made a pretty good connection and we ended pretty decent on this one. So thanks again for coming on, Jose. It was an awesome conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate you bring me on.
All right, everybody, go check out Jose on the No Way Jose podcast. I'm losing my voice. It's a really good show. Especially check out that OKC bombing series, because that was freaking fantastic. Otherwise, check us out all over social media. We are everywhere, all the main social media platforms at Break the Bell Pod. Like, share, subscribe. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, because we need to get our subscribers back up to where we were before we got nuked. We got our new show, our new morning show, me partnering with Dan Smotz of the System is Down podcast. It's called Two Scoops, every Tuesday and Thursday morning when we feel like it. That is how I preface that. So that's 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. It's a 30-minute short form news show. So check that out. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. We will see you back here next time.
Peace.
Goodbye.
The Break the Bell podcast is brought to you by you. So pat yourself on the back, because without you, we would be talking to ourselves. A special thanks to our Patreon members, Justin Zielinski, Remzo Martinez, Stephanie Parker, and T.O. Jacobson. A shout out to our sponsors, Run Your Mouth Coffee, the On the Run podcast, and Goulash Media. If you'd like to help support us, visit patreon.com/breakthebell or buy our garbage at breakthebell.bigcartel.com. Get back here next week and let us continue to invade your ear holes. And as always, never stop talking.